It's always a pleasure to be able to spend some time and share some thoughts with American manufacturers. And let me start first by congratulating the Best Plant Award winners. That is a tremendous honor. And also, I know that this is probably the only event in my career where I will give the keynote at 7:30 in the morning. And coming out of the manufacturing area myself, I spent the first 15 years of my life there. I know we start very early in the morning, and that's a habit that I continue today as well. So, great opportunity to get back to my roots with an early start. Sometimes the television drama provides some insights about pressing issues that are facing America today, like the decline of our manufacturing base. And I'd like to share with you an example of that. There may be some of you who in the room who are fans of the HBO series The Wire. And if so, you probably would recognize a character named Frank Sabatka. He's a leader of the Longshoremen's Union Local in Baltimore. And in this particular episode, he makes a Faustian bargain with organized crime in a desperate effort to save jobs for his union members. In that context, in this particular episode, he turns to his lobbyist and says, what the trouble is, Brucey, is that we used to make stuff here in this country, build stuff. Now we just put our hand in the other guy's pocket. Now, actually, if you're a fan of that particular drama, you know he didn't say stuff. He says something else, but you get the idea here. But for those of you in this room who grew up in Baltimore or in Cleveland or Pittsburgh or Detroit, or like me in a small town, New Martinsville, West Virginia, we can probably relate to Frank Sabatka's comments and to the sentiment that he's describing here. Because making stuff and building stuff that's what we do. It's what gets us out of bed in the morning, and it's what keeps us working late at night, makes it tough to go home sometimes in the evening. For many of us, chances are your father, like mine, built stuff or made stuff, and probably his father before him. So it is just what we do, and it really makes us who we are. But as I think most of us come to realize in the last 30 years or 20 years, or even in the last 10 years, you could say that the common working man or woman is really not so common anymore. And why is that? And that is because here in the U.S., manufacturing could become a lost art. That certainly is true in the chemical industry, where I've spent the vast majority of my 30-year career. Major chemical plants that cost more than $1 billion to build are almost exclusively built elsewhere now. And when you consider that 96% of everything that we make, all manufactured goods, including a lot of products that are essential to our national security, contain chemicals and are directly touched by the chemical industry, that is not a good development, because dependence on chemical manufacturing, very much like dependence on foreign chemical manufacturing, like dependence on foreign oil, is not really a sustainable, or at least not a very predictable model for the United States. And as more American manufacturing has moved to other countries, logically, so has the chemical production to meet those product requirements. And with it, many very high-paying jobs. America's chemical industry employment has declined by more than 20% in the last 2 decades. We had 1 million people working in the chemical industry in 1990. Today we have 780,000 people. And these jobs also support nearly 4 million other supplier and other expenditure-induced jobs, many of the things that we do in this room, along with those, with that 200,000 lost positions. According to the Bureau of Economic Analysis, which is an agency of the Department of Commerce, U.S. manufacturing contributed as much as 30% of GNP after World War II. And since 2007, due to the recession and many other factors, that share of GNP today has fallen to around 11%. And the stuff that we stopped making isn't just the stuff of Frank Sabatka's glory days. So we're not just talking about steel and cars and heavy equipment, but it's also what we would call the products of the mature industries. But it's also microprocessors and cell phones and navigation systems and other innovations that we would refer to as high tech. One of my favorite op-eds recently came from the former chairman and CEO of Intel, Andy Grove, who pointed out in an op-ed in Business Week that the critical phase in technology is when a company moves from startup to mass production. And if any of you have done that, you know that is a very critical phase. This is where the companies, and I'll quote his words, work out design details, figure out how to make things affordably, build factories, and hire people by the thousands. Scaling is hard work, but necessary to make innovation matter. End quote. Most of the high-tech scaling today is happening in Asia, primarily in China. And there is one Taiwanese company, which is Hanhai Precision Industry, also known as Foxconn, that they are the world's largest electronics contract manufacturer, and they employ more than 800,000 people. And when you compare that, for a benchmark, that's more than the worldwide headcount of Apple, Dell, Microsoft, Hewlett-Packard, Intel, and Sony all added together. But, as we know, there are some very positive signs for manufacturing. U.S. manufacturing added 33,000 jobs in February, and that growth was led by machinery and fabricated metal manufacturing. I'm sure you track these numbers as well as I do. We added an additional 17,000 in March. So there are very positive signs. And the manufacturing output indexes hit their highest levels in the last 7 years in February. An Institute for Supply Management survey showed that large manufacturing gains in that period were spurred by declining inventories and also, very positively, by robust export demand. So, there is some momentum. And whether this momentum is going to continue on a long-term basis will depend on a number of factors, some of which Tom mentioned already. And they are, to a large extent, on public policy, or energy, public policy on energy, on regulation, on taxes, and on trade. And all of us who are in manufacturing, I share with you a statistic that I heard recently, that when looking over the long term through multiple business cycles, that the events that impact our success as a business that are controllable to us are about 12% directly controllable to us as entrepreneurs or as business leaders, and that the vast majority are things that are truly outside of our control. Whether it's local public policy or geopolitics or natural disasters like we're seeing in Japan. So it puts some of that into perspective that we must reach outside of our factory doors in order to impact decisions so that we can have a larger hand in controlling our own fate. Now, some very well-known capitalists believed that America should levy an extra tax on products that are produced offshore, even if that would spark a trade war. Well, we tried that approach in 1930, and we wound up with the worst economic calamity in modern history. And there are very precious few issues that any two economists can agree on, but the impossibility of winning a trade war probably would rank right up at the top of the list of topics that they can agree on. So I think we have to realize that we can't tax our way to prosperity, and we can't wall out our competitors. So if that's the case, how do we create an America that returns back to making stuff? Well, I think that I may have stumbled across at least the framework of an answer to that. And this framework can be found in the unheralded work of two geniuses, I think, Angus Maddison, who is a Scottish economist who passed away just last spring, and William Bernstein, an American neurologist turned investment advisor turned historian. Professor Maddison spent close to 6 decades looking at one single economic statistic, which was GDP per capita. And he did that in every country, and he did it truly across the whole of human history. His research really probably should have earned him a Nobel Prize for helping to uncover one of the greatest mysteries of economics. And here it is. The work of a lifetime distilled in a single chart. So you might call this the mother of all hockey sticks. Or a marketing plan. Per capita economic growth was essentially non-existent for much of recorded history. Now, around 1000 AD, you can see that there was a little improvement, but it was really too gradual and unreliable to be noticeable. Then, along about 1820, something truly amazing happened, coinciding with the Industrial Revolution. And you get this remarkable growth trajectory, which works out to be about 2% of inflation-adjusted income growth per year, and this continues to this day. So that with each successive generation, a child could look forward to a life that was more comfortable, more enlightened, and more predictable than his parents' lives had been. We take that state of affairs for granted today. But in historical terms, material progress is really comparatively new. And you could even say radical from an idea perspective. So Professor Maddison made a few attempts to explain what historical forces might have been behind such an amazing change in the world's success and its fortunes, but alas, he was a better statistician than he was an historian. So the data really just sat there. It sat there waiting for someone to come up with a logically convincing explanation. And that's where Dr. Bernstein entered the picture with the publication of his book, The Birth of Plenty, in 2004. Bernstein set forth what he calls a hypothesis of wealth, and it's based on 4 principles. Each one of these principles has to be present in order to create real and sustainable economic growth. And these 4 principles are property rights, scientific rationalism, capital markets, and efficient transportation and communication. When you bring all 4 of these forces into play, you begin to manufacture products that really improve people's lives. Now, why these four things? Well, you need property rights because inventors and entrepreneurs have to feel secure that the fruits of their labors won't be arbitrarily confiscated by the state or by criminals or by monopolists. You need scientific rationalism because economic progress depends a lot on scientific ideas. You need capital markets because the mass production of new goods and services, as you all know, calls for vast amounts of other people's money. And finally, you need fast and efficient transportation to get your products into the hands of your consumers hundreds or even thousands of miles away. So, I think you could use these four principles from Bernstein as a way to look at the decline of manufacturing in America, where our own industrial revolution may have veered a bit off track, and more importantly, how we can get it rolling again. First, let's take property rights. Right now, the U.S. tax system is an obstacle to innovation, to investment, and to job creation. It's an obstacle to everything that we need to make America competitive in the worldwide economy. Our corporate tax rate at 35%, as you probably all know, is the second highest among the 30 OECD countries. Only Japan has a higher tax rate. Most countries are lowering their corporate taxes, while we tend to be moving in the opposite direction. The two chairmen of President Obama's Deficit Commission recommended that America's corporate tax rate be dropped to 26%, and that would be a step in the right direction. During his State of the Union address in January, President Obama said that the corporate tax rate, quote, makes no sense and it has to change, end quote. And I personally believe he is right on the button. Now, does he really mean it? We'll see. He didn't mention R&D tax credit. It should be made permanent in my view. At Bayer, we know that the federal R&D tax credit is a proven incentive to spur additional R&D and U.S. investment. It allows manufacturers and businesses to recover 20% of their R&D outlays. Yet, Congress routinely lets the credit expire term after term before eventually renewing it. This credit has expired 12 times since it was first enacted in 1981. Our nation was the world leader in R&D tax incentives during the 1980s. We now rank 17th among the OECD nations, and I think this has to change too. Scientific rationalism. As this chart suggests, America faces a shortage of talent in the STEM fields: science, technology, engineering, and math. And I know some of you may sit there and say there are a lot of engineers looking for a job. That is a temporary, transient issue. We need to do more to stimulate a spirit of scientific inquiry in the United States, from the classroom into the research lab. That's why at Bayer we work very hard to promote science education and literacy in all of its forms and at a very early age. We literally invest millions of dollars in our Making Science Make Sense program and efforts to get women and underrepresented minorities interested in STEM studies and STEM careers. The Department of Education estimates that America will need 400,000 new graduates in STEM fields by 2015. We're not likely to get them. And we can't go very far in filling the gap when only 65,000 temporary H-1B visas are being issued annually. In February, I spoke before a group of about 90 students at the University of Pennsylvania's Wharton School. These were Students who were, many of them were pursuing double majors in business and engineering or other STEM fields. And many of them were from other countries here on H-1B visas. Congress needs to make it easier for these talented young men and women to stay in America. As President Obama said in his State of the Union address, as soon as students from abroad earn their advanced degrees, we send them back home to compete against us. It makes no sense, end quote. So he's right on the button again. Bernstein's third principle, access to capital markets, is something that we have also largely taken for granted here in America for many, many years, but not anymore. The market meltdown of 2008 has taken a toll on our financial system and the availability of credit to fund new business growth. So our government needs to implement the new financial reforms very carefully to give banks the certainty that they need to begin taking prudent risks and lending in a way that grows our economy and creates jobs. And finally, there's the issue of transportation. America needs to invest more in infrastructure to more efficiently move our products and people. That's going to require capital budgeting, that's going to require private investment bonding, and it's going to require environmental permit streamlining. A recent analysis by the nonpartisan Millikan Institute estimate that infrastructure investment of $225 billion over 3 years would create about 6 million jobs, $238 billion in earnings, and $775 billion in output. So, I've just touched on some public policy steps that our government can take to help manufacturing move and get moving again in America. But that isn't going to happen unless we start a conversation like today and keep it going. We need to have that conversation with our thought leaders. We need to have it with our elected officials in our national public life. We need to have it with our regulators. And we need to have it, most importantly, with our employees and with the general public. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce and trade associations like the National Association of Manufacturers, and in my particular industry, the American Chemistry Council, play very essential roles in this national conversation. But I don't believe that we can leave and shouldn't leave it up to these associations to carry all of the water for us. So what can we do? If your company doesn't have a political action committee, perhaps you should consider forming one so that you can support candidates who share your positions. Even if you don't form a PAC, if you aren't doing it, you should begin to meet with your congressional leaders on Capitol Hill and your state capitals. You should write op-eds and get them published. You should keep the dialogue going with your customers, with your suppliers, and yes, with your employees. Our own employees can be the best ambassadors for positive political change. But in order to engage them, first we must often educate and inform them about the issues specifically that are affecting manufacturing, and then ask them and encourage them to become actively engaged. Legislators pay very close attention to the emails, the phone letters, or the phone calls and the letters that they receive from their constituents. Because unlike the opinion polls, direct, or even lobbyists to some extent, direct constituent communications give them a sense of really how strongly their voters in their districts feel about the issues that directly affect them. Finally, we always have to remember that fishes swim and birds fly and regulators regulate. It's what gets them up in the morning and what keeps them late in the office as well. So, wherever possible, we need to stay ahead of regulation. It can be done. I like to share a story of more than 20 years ago. I was working in Germany as a production manager in what was at the time the newest plant that we had in the entire Bayer world. We designed that plant to limit carbon dioxide generation 20 years ago. And we did it well in advance of any regulatory pressure. There was no regulatory pressure at that time. We had the technology, and applying it was the right thing to do for that plant, and it was the right thing to do for the planet. Another example, at our big production plant in Baytown, Texas, the largest single plant until recently in the Bayer world. A patent-pending employee idea to improve boiler operations led to a decrease in greenhouse gas emissions at that plant equivalent to 13,000 metric tons of carbon a year. And what's more, that single process change will save the plant some $2 million annually in operating costs. Also at the same facility, we voluntarily worked with a partner of ours, El Dorado Nitrogen, to install equipment to reduce emissions of nitrous oxide, also a greenhouse gas, at the nitric acid production facility in Baytown. We achieved a 75% reduction in the nitrous oxide emissions, and that's equivalent to 550,000 metric tons of carbon dioxide emissions a year, or the equivalent of 130,000 vehicles traveling nearly 16,000 miles a year. And here again, this was not a response to regulation. We did this voluntarily. So I think the message here is how we manufacture our products, as many of you know, is just as important as the products themselves, and we can never afford to forget that. So, as I hope that I've successfully suggested this morning, the decline of manufacturing in America isn't an historical inevitability. In fact, history teaches us that prosperity really is a choice, and that we can encourage the factors that give rise to economic growth, or we can discourage them, as we are in too many instances doing today in America. Many years ago, George Washington wrote in a letter to Benjamin Harrison, quote, "A people who are possessed of the spirit of commerce may achieve almost anything," end quote. The succeeding 2 centuries have vindicated that statement, as the tail end of Professor Madison's hockey stick graph clearly attests. And the Industrial Revolution is far from over. So the only question is whether we have the determination and the political will to keep it alive here in America. So as Frank Sabatka might put it, we can either make stuff in this country or we can stick our hand in the other guy's pocket. And that decision is up to us. Thank you very much. So, Steve, we're doing Q&A, I think? Okay. I'd be happy to take any questions if there are any, or comments. There's a question back here. I think a microphone is probably coming so the group can hear.
Thank you. As you have engaged your associates, I assume you have at Bayer, in being a little more active politically, You know, the concern that I would wonder, how do you avoid is, you know, is you start going down a path that your associates don't find that you're picking a party. You know, there's, you know, half the people go one way, half the people go the other way, and as I think employers, we need to be more open and I guess, in favor by most. And when you pick a side, it tends to be dangerous. Now, I understand that the way you explained that you would attack certain platforms and not really make it party-oriented, but as you kind of roll that down through the organization, I guess how that gets translated and communicated by your management team,
it's a great
stands
question.
the risk of polarizing.
It's a great question because generally the you know, America is split pretty much 51-49 on almost every issue, and there's no difference here. So how do we do that? We start by doing education. So we have, in the last 3 years, we're just about to do our 7th public policy forum. And what I do is take a topic that's of great interest. The one that we're doing, I think next week, Brian, is that right? Next week we have our 7th, which is on hydraulic fracking in shale gas. Not necessarily critical directly to our industry, but we're a major consumer of natural gas as a raw material as well as an energy source. And I think the development of shale gas is a real game changer in the United States if we do it right. So, I have a public policy forum. I will invite several hundred of my employees. I will invite my retirees as well, and other thought leaders in the region, and we will present the entire spectrum. So I have someone coming to talk about the importance of natural gas and an advantaged natural gas price for industry in general and the game-changing nature of that for the United States. And I have someone coming to talk about the dangers of fracking liquids and water potential water problems associated with it. And then I'll also have someone typically coming from an academic perspective. So usually 3 to 4 speakers who all cover the spectrum. And I don't announce what the right position is, but I inform my employees. And as it becomes time for a grassroots call-out, I will then share the company's position, but not before I've educated the employees first about the entire topic. Because how many of you have stepped into to the state capitol or gone to Congress and gone to Capitol Hill and you walked in and you met with a very young, very intelligent staffer from one of your representatives? And you said, you know, here's my position on an issue. These are really sharp people who can come back to you very quickly with, well, what about this? What about that? You know, the congressman really needs to fully understand this. It becomes very clear, if you don't have any answers, if you don't understand the topic, that you're just a talking head coming in espousing a particular position. So we believe an education on the broad spectrum is very important before you ask people to engage on a grass tops or a grassroots level. And that's been our approach. We will obviously at some point share our company position and encourage our employees to get engaged. And we're also encouraging them to do more than simply send letters. Quite frankly, the most effective way to engage is by going to town hall meetings that most of your representatives are now holding and talking at the town hall meetings. That's the most influential way to have a voice heard. But it's a little scary too. Any other questions?
Okay. Yeah, I have one here. You know, you talked about higher education as being a key. What's your feeling on vocational training and the lack of vocational training in this country, and as opposed to Germany and other countries that you're familiar with?
Yeah, also a very good question. We talk about, from an education perspective, especially STEM education, we talk about the full spectrum. So we have programs that we're supporting at our Making Science Make Sense program actually targets K through 8. So what we do with that program is we have 1,000 of our employees who actually volunteer to go into the school districts to demonstrate hands-on science and really to help teachers, to give teachers better tools how to teach science and make science fun. We've supported science programs at the middle and high school level through programs like ASSET, which is really providing kits and training for teachers at that level of how to improve their skills and their comfort in teaching science. When you look at the hours that science is taught in the schools, in our schools, it is incredibly low. You know, sometimes an hour a week, sometimes not at all. And so that's in our standard school system. So we've addressed the issue K through 8. We've addressed the issue at the high school level. We're also working with universities like Cal State East Bay, where we have a major operation in the Berkeley area. They're trying to provide incentives for more students, especially the minority population in that region, to become interested in STEM. And vocational training is just an extension, and we have examples where we've supported that. I think it's critically important as well, especially in the manufacturing for manufacturers. For many people in this room, it's not always about the bachelor's or the master's in engineering, but it's also about having a vocational background as a welder or as an electrician. Critically important also. So our approach has been to hit and focus on all of those areas that are STEM related. Okay.
Great presentation, by the way.
Thank you.
You know, Bayer is a global company, and I know you've spent some time in Germany, and I'm wondering if there are there lessons that we in the United States can take away from a country such as Germany on how they support their manufacturing sector, how they develop their industrial strategy and things like that.
Well, I'm not going to go into the politics of taxes and those sorts of things, but one thing I will share from my experiences in Germany is that I felt it's a great tie back to the previous question. I felt they did a much better job at a vocational training level of preparing operators or pump compressor mechanics or welders who came into the facility, and we've carried that same approach into the developing economies today. So we're taking a very similar approach in China, where we're investing very heavily at the moment, and I think that is I do believe that we have employees who come into employment with us who are much better prepared because of that vocational element. It was that way 20 years ago, and it still continues to be that way today. Okay. Well, thank you all very much, and thanks for letting me take some of your time, and I wish you a very enjoyable and informative conference here.